It's a pleasure to welcome you here in December and not have to apologize for the weather. I fear I'm going to take slightly longer making an introduction tonight just because we have a few people trailing in from the souk, and far be it from me to try to cut off sales at the souk tonight. In addition to which, I think tonight's speaker deserves a slightly longer than usual introduction because she's one of the people who has made and is continuing to make the Institute the caliber place that it is. And it's a real pleasure for us and for me to have her speaking to us tonight. I think all of you know her, and I probably am going to be repeating things that all of you already know in trying to introduce her. I'm noted for my relatively short introductions and not waxing terribly eloquent, but I don't think I need to tonight simply because she is well known to all of you. Erika Reiner did her first studies in Budapest and then went to the École Pratique in Paris. She received her PhD here at the University of Chicago, and I am pleased to say that she also has an honorary degree from the University of Pennsylvania. She has done important work in the field of Elamite, the language of ancient Iran, which is written in cuneiform. She has done extensive work on ancient astronomy. Her interests in the language and literature of Akkadian in the broadest sense, the whole range of ancient Mesopotamian languages, is immense. Since 1973, she has been the John A. Wilson Professor, Distinguished Service Professor, and Editor-in-Chief of the Assyrian Dictionary. Tonight she's going to talk to us about only one of her many interests and specializations. I'm going to take a few notes when she talks about hallowed herbs, how to get the most out of your Babylonian pharmacy. Erika Reiner.
Thank you very much, Jen. It is a great pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you here and to share with you some of the research that I've been doing when I was not working on the Assyrian Dictionary. And this is a research that has taken me all over the place, from Mesopotamia to Greece to medieval Europe, back to the Near East to Hellenistic Egypt, and so on. And only recently did I realize that I could have just as well stayed right here in Illinois. Namely, the Illinois Humanities Council has just sponsored an audiovisual program dealing with, in their own words, traditional wild food gatherers and preparers, herb doctors, and medicinal root diggers. In the fall 1988 number of its publication, Humanities, it reports on the Shawnee Hill wild food gatherer, the herb doctor, and the root digger who scour the woods and fields for the plants they have relied upon for many generations. In such rural communities, it is, again to quote them, through storytelling, demonstration, and oral instruction that most traditional knowledge is passed down through the generations. Now, oral instruction and storytelling must have existed in ancient Mesopotamia too, but they are irrevocably lost to us. Still, there have survived written sources on cuneiform tablets written over a period of 2,000 years that acquaint us with the art of gathering herbs for medicinal and magic uses. These were the texts that have acquainted the ancient root digger in Babylonia, as well as in the neighboring countries, with the nature of the herbs to be used and the proper procedures for securing them. It is important to know your roots and herbs and what they are good for. It is also important to pick the herb or dig up the root in the proper manner so as to maximize its healing power and to guard against the evil consequences of your acts. But it is perhaps most important to know the proper time to administer the medicine by selecting an astrologically propitious moment. A 16th century doctor urged, above all things, next to grammar, a physician must have surely his astronomy to know how, when, and at what time every medicine ought to be administered. And may I have the first slide, please? By the way, I was quoting not from the 16th century BC, but from a book written in the 16th century AD. And this is the kind of things they were doing then. This is called the Tree of Planets. And they are now calculating the proper times for their, I presume it's really rather for alchemy than medicine, but this will have to serve. I will take up in turn these three matters: the identification of the medicinal herb, its selection and picking, and its preparation and administration. I should caution you, however, just as the Illinois Humanities Council does in a disclaimer, from using what you may learn tonight for culinary or therapeutic purposes. My presentation, in the words of that disclaimer, is not intended as an advocacy for use of the materials presented. Lists of plants, stones, animals, and other objects and materials had been compiled in Mesopotamia since the beginning of writing in Sumerian times. Names of herbs appear in various types of lists. The earliest lists simply give the words, or maybe I should say the cuneiform signs, for objects or living beings arranged either by topic or in an acrographic sequence, according to the class marks used to write them. In a serological parlance, we call these class marks determinatives, or in J. Gelb's terminology, semantic indicators. What part of this classification is to be attributed to pedagogical purposes, such as mnemotechnic devices for instruction in reading and writing, and what part to intellectual curiosity in classifying the substances and entities of the world around, is as difficult to determine as the role of similar classifications in collections that are known from late antiquity and medieval times. The compilatory nature of these early lists is not altered by the fact that eventually the Sumerian entries were provided with Akkadian translations, thus giving rise to lists in double columns. Even when a third column was added, also in Akkadian, to explain terms that had become obsolete, neither the sequence nor the purpose of these lists was changed in any substantial way, even when another equivalent or synonym was added to the two-column list. Only occasionally was an attempt made to introduce comments and other scholia, and with them some interpretation. Among the various types of explanatory lists, there was composed, around 1000 BC, a handbook which might be called the world's first herbal. Although in serological literature it more often goes under such a name as a pharmaceutical handbook, or Veda-mecum of the physician. The ancient Babylonians simply called it tablet about herbs. In outward appearance, this list too is divided in three columns. The first column gives the name of the plant, the second, the indication, that is, the symptoms or name of the disease it is supposed to counteract, and the third, the mode of application, how it is to be prepared, for example, ground, diluted in beer, and how it is to be administered, for example, as a potion, a salve, and so on. The principle of arrangement follows the middle column. That is, the herbs are grouped according to the disease that the herb is good for. This layout is convenient for finding the remedies for a particular ailment by simply going down the middle column of the list. For example, yellow saffron for constricted bladder, to chop to give to drink in fine beer. Cornish acorn, for the same, to chop, to give to drink in fine beer. Garlic, for the same, to chop, to give to drink in oil or fine beer. Pistachio herb for the lungs, to chop, to give to drink on an empty stomach. Dog's tongue, herb for cough, to press out its juice and give to drink. I couldn't resist showing you the oil that is used in these recipes, which is pressed in these linseed mills in Isfahan. And there's the same slide. In addition to these pharmaceutical lists, there exist fragments of yet another type of herbal. These texts are known to the Assyriologists as the series Shamu Shikinshu, from its opening words. These words are not easy to translate. If we consider the literal meaning alone, the first, Shamu, means plant, grass, herb, and of course, as its Arabic cognate, Sam, it also means poison. Thus, the herbal could also be called a poison book, as its Arabic counterpart, the Kitab as-Sumum. The second word, Shikinshu, has a suffix, shu, pointing back to Shamu, herb. Thus, it means its shiknu. Shiknu is a word we have variously translated in the Assyrian dictionary by appearance, looks, character, and the like. However, if we take our cue from handbooks of a later period, we may choose the English term nature, simply because medieval texts begin the description with this word, either with natura, if in Latin, or with the form equivalent to natura in the Romance language used. And so we too should feel free to translate the opening words as the nature of the herb is. Of course, pharmaceutical handbooks may deal with substances other than plants. Stones, too, can have a therapeutic effect, especially when strung together as amulets, which can secure health and riches and avert disease and harm. There are, accordingly, handbooks dealing with stones and minerals as well as with plants, and even one that deals with snakes. Thus, each of the three genres, herbals, stone breweries, and bestiaries, are represented in Babylonia. The common origin and purpose of these handbooks is evident from their common structure. Just as each entry in the herbal begins with Shamu Shikinshu, similarly each entry in the stone book begins with Abnu Shikinshu, the nature of the stone is, and in the sole Babylonian bestiary by Tseru Shikinshu, the snake's nature is. What these handbooks lack are the illustrations of the later herbals. I should like to say, just because I'm an honest person, that I do not want to be decked in borrowed finery. Many of these slides I owe to the generosity to my colleagues who have scoured their files for appropriate slides to show you, especially Lynn Cantor, Bob Rittner, and Karen Wilson. So this is one of these slides. Since Babylonian herbals don't have illustrations, we must content ourselves with descriptions. They're often very precise, but as usual, they're couched in terms of the plant's difference from other plants with which it is compared and that we also don't know. For example, the herb whose nature is like the Amhara plants, but its leaves are small and it has no milky sap, its seed resembles linseed, that plant is called Labubitu. The herb whose nature is like that of the Amhara plants, but its seed is red, like that of the Abulilu plant, that herb is called, there the text breaks, it is good for removing paralysis, to dry, to crush, and to apply as a salve mixed in oil. Or, the herb's nature is, its thorn is like the thorn of cress. Its leaves are as large as cress leaves, That herb is called namhara. Whoever drinks it will die. An even more detailed description runs, the herb's nature is like that of the dog's tongue, or according to a second source, like the hatapanu herb. Its leaves are long, its fruit is like the adat squash, it grows tall, its seed, like the tobacco plant, is divided in three. That herb is called shunazi, and in the language of Hatti, they call it tubacanu, that is the tobacco-like plant. It is good for scorpion sting. Its mode of preparation, to dry, to crush, to give to drink in beer. Obviously, these descriptions are very much like those found in the spells collected in the Hellenistic magical papyri, written in Greek or in Demotic. For example, the Kentritis plant grows from the months of Piney onward in the regions of the Black Earth, that is Egypt, and is similar to the erect verbena. This is how to recognize it. If an ibis wing is dipped at its black tip and smeared with the juice, the feathers fall off when touched. Its stem is single and reddish down to the root, and the leaves are rather crinkled and have fruit like the tip of wild asparagus. It is similar to the so-called talates, like the wild beet. This very Kentritis is best picked, as the same papyrus recommends, at the night of the new moon, when the sun is in Leo. And from a Demotic magical papyrus in Jan Johnson's translation, the ivy, it grows in gardens. Its leaf is like the leaf of a Shechem plant, being divided into three lobes like a grape leaf. It is 1 palm in measurement. Its blossom is like silver. Another manuscript says gold. While many plant names, among them the ones I have quoted, are untranslatable, others, like the dog's tongue I've also mentioned, are meaningful but outlandish. Yet the oxblood, human skull, or lion's blood, appearing in Babylonian texts, are really no stranger than the humble herbs, wild lettuce, poke, and lamb's quarters that the root diggers gather today. And how about foxglove or snapdragon? It is again the Hellenistic papyri that provide us with a clue. And I quote, "Because of the masses' eagerness to practice magic, the temple scribes inscribed the names of the herbs and other things which they employed on the statues of the gods, so that the masses, as a consequence of their misunderstanding, might not practice magic. But we have collected the explanations of these names from many copies of the sacred writings, all of them secret. Here they are. A snake's head, a leech. Blood of a snake, hematite. Lion semen, human semen. Semen of Hermes, dill. Blood from a head, lupine. Blood of Hephaestus, artemisia. Human bile, turnip sap. Fat from a head, spurge. But note, blood of porcupine, really from the porcupine. Campbell Thompson also realized in his introduction to his Dictionary of Assyrian Chemistry and Geology that the Assyrian was ready to call what was almost certainly opium, which is a nice painting of the poppy here, but not from Mesopotamia, by name of lion fat or human fat, or castor oil, as the blood of a black snake. Other plant names are less fanciful, even though they may betray wishful thinking. Imhur Eshra, it cures 20, that is ailments, and even Imhur Limu, it cures 1,000. Just as in German, there is an herb called Tausendgüldenkraut, and of course in Hungarian there is a similar word, Azeriofi for our Hungarians present, while the corresponding English word Centauri derives, according to some scholars only, from the word 100. According to others, it derives from the word centaur. There is, of course, our word panacea, borrowing from Greek where it literally means cure-all. Certain herbs bear names associated with a god or goddess, no doubt meant to establish an affinity with the deity. But while, as we have seen, Greek plants are called by such names as blood of Hephaestus or semen of Hermes, Babylonians named their herbs that bear the name of a god or goddess more poetically: bed of Ishtar, earth of the storm god, or perfume of Ninurta. Still, the herb so poetically called perfume of the goddess Ishara is none other than the kunabu, the infamous cannabis or hashish. In ancient natural histories, it is often added to the description of the plant that the species comes in two sexes, male and female. Of course, the division of materia into masculine and feminine is well known from Greek and Latin authors. According to commentators, among them Pliny the Elder, masculine herbs are stronger and more effective than the feminine ones. The same division into two sexes applies to gems. Theophrastus divided stones into male and female. Even modern jewelers, it seems, use this distinction as a technical term. Gems that have a deeper, more vivid color are the male ones, and those of a paler color, the female gems. In Akkadian, too, the shubu stone comes in a male and a female variety, and so do the shoe stone, blackfeet, and others. The most frequently mentioned male and female herb is the one called Nikiptu in Akkadian, by its Sumerian name, perfume of the god Ninurta. While it is possible that the division into a male and female variety refers only to the properties described by classical authors, it is tempting to assume that these terms describe the magic herb par excellence, namely that root which, when dug up, resembles a human figure, the mandragora or mandrake, which indeed was thought to come in the shape of both a man and a woman. It's very small, but I think it... Oh, thank you. No, now it's focused. The fame of Babylonian herbalists is attested in a 9th century AD Arabic book known as Nabataean Agriculture, which reports that certain medicinal plants were introduced by Babylonian kings whose names it lists. In fact, we know from Babylonian medical texts that certain salves and strings of amulet stones were attributed to a famous king of the past. For example, to Hammurabi, Naram-Sin, and Rim-Sin. Another, perhaps not quite trustworthy witness to the fame of Babylonian drugs is the woman scorned in Theocritus' second idyll, who swears, "If he continues to grieve me, I call on the fates as my witness. Soon he shall knock at the portals of Hades such sinister drugs I keep in my medicine chest, which I learned about from a Chaldean." In regard to physicians, however, the greatest fame in antiquity attached to the Egyptians, so great a fame that their neighbors in Anatolia begged them to provide medicine, a topic that has been amply treated by Egyptologists. And I think it is backwards, but doesn't really. No, maybe not. You see the Egyptian physician giving to a medicine to drink to a Syrian ruler. Yet the herbs themselves used by these physicians may not have been native to Egypt, but actually came from the Near East. Thutmose III describes how he brought back from his campaigns to Syria, from the land of retinue, all kinds of plants, which he also had depicted on the reliefs of his palace at Karnak. No. They're not very large, especially on double screen, but they were much more precise in representing these plants. I am no botanist and thus cannot identify the plants shown here, and neither can, it seems, Egyptologists who interpret these reliefs. As you note, among the trees and the plants, and birds are also depicted. It is perhaps a fortuitous coincidence, but I can't help thinking, as I see this bird that has been identified as a raven, of a plant, of a plant described in Babylonian texts as follows. The herb on which the raven alights is called actam. It is good for being well received in the palace, to chop, to smear on, mixed in oil. Well, it's time we return to the root digger and his preparations for picking the needed herbs. He has to make sure of two things: that the plant is picked at the moment when its virtue is greatest, and that he himself does not suffer as a consequence of uprooting the plant. A number of non-Mesopotamian texts are more explicit than ours about the best times to pick an herb. An herb's potency is often tied, for example, to the phases of the moon. The herb is more potent when the moon waxes than when it rains. It is, however, important that the sun not shine on it. For this last precaution, we have many attestations from Babylonia too, very similar to those known from folk medicine and from antiquity, by the procedures that the root cutter, which is the literal translation of Greek rhizotomos, has to observe when picking a plant are well documented. The herb must be picked at night and the sun mustn't shine on it. The Babylonian herbal of which I have spoken occasionally specifies the use of a root which the sun did not see when you pulled it up. A medical text enjoins you crush the root of the nampa plant which was not exposed to the sun when it was dug up. The safest way to avoid not only sunlight but even moonlight, which could be noxious, is of course to pick the plant on the night of the new moon. This is expressed either as on the day when the moon disappears from the sky, or by specifying the new moon's day, Akkadian Bubuli. And recall the root of hemlock dipped in the dark, as well as slips of yew slivered in the moon's eclipse that the witches in Macbeth throw into their cauldron. Other precautions too must be taken. For example, a bilingual text prescribes, look for a gourd which grows alone in the plain. When the sun has gone down, cover your head with a cloth, cover the gourd too, draw a magic circle with flour around it, and at dawn, before sunup, pull it up and take its root. To cut the root, one mustn't use a tool made of iron, a precaution that is well known from Greek and Latin texts, as can be seen from a passage in Pliny's Natural History. The plant called salago is gathered without iron with the right hand thrust under the tunic through the left armhole, as though the gatherer were thieving. The earliest attestation for this practice too comes from Babylonia, as was recognized by Fontenot as early as 1941, or maybe earlier, by others. Moreover, the root digger must make sure that he doesn't come to harm as a result of his action. The plant may not willingly give up the leaf or shoot needed for preparing the medication. It is often necessary to buy it from the plant, or at least to give some compensation for it. Theophrastus reports that it is said that when one is cutting iris, one should put in its place to pay for it cakes of meal from spring-sown wheat, and that one should cut it with a two-edged sword, first making a circle round it 3 times. We learned that in Babylonia, the acacia shrub is such a plant. When collecting acacia shoots, you spread them under an acacia shrub that grows on a mud wall and say, "You have received the present intended for you. Now give me the plant of life." And this is not an acacia, but these are some daisies on the left from a sherd in Assur, and these are the daisies in today's Khuzestan growing out there. At the very least, the herbalist must propitiate the plant by speaking a greeting or a prayer, for which I may again quote Pliny. Some instruct the diggers of the Pimpernel to say nothing until they have saluted it before sunrise, and then to gather it and extract the juice, for so they say its efficacy is at its greatest. Even Christian monks recommended that while gathering herbs, it would be holy to speak the salutation, "All hail, thou holy herb vervain, growing on the ground." Once you're safely in possession of the herb, it must be properly prepared to enter into the potion, salve, bath, or whatever medium is to be used in the treatment. Even though the herbalist may himself dry, crush, and grind the ingredients, such tasks are often best carried out by a young man who has not yet known a woman, or by a woman who has stopped giving birth. I'm not using these terms out of Victorian prudery. I'm simply translating literally what the Babylonians say. When the salve or potion is prepared, the final step to make the medicine efficacious is to expose it to the stars. We read many times in our texts about the need to let the medicine spend the night under the stars. The phrase used is couched as an instruction to the physician. "Ina kakabi tushbat," you let it spend the night under the stars. This phrase was translated in the Assyrian dictionary in one of its more rationalist moments as "you let it stand overnight." The Assyrian dictionary no doubt assumed that the instruction simply expressed the notion that just as today medicine, or for that matter orange juice, is best kept in a cool, dark place. Or perhaps it provided for the practical necessity of letting the medication steep in the cool of the night so that the ingredients may be blended, not unlike the directions cookbooks give us. Even a distinguished German historian of medicine was of the opinion that the aim of letting the medicine stand overnight was to macerate the ingredients. But even if such a practical purpose was also achieved, we can use multiple evidence coming both from Babylonia and from the world surrounding it that the medication was in fact exposed to the stars and not only to the cool of the night. The nocturnal exposition was to effect that the stars irradiate the medicine and thus render it more potent. For example, in an unpublished text, a lotion is exposed to astral irradiation. You let it stand under the stars. In the morning, you bathe him with it. Emetics, which are prepared with herbs infused in water or mixed into oil as carrier, are also exposed to the stars. You expose it to the stars overnight, he will drink it and vomit. Powdered minerals are added to beer and then mixed with juniper oil, exposed to the stars, and in the morning, before the sun rises, you anoint the patient's entire body. A similar recipe directs, you set out a holy water vessel, put tamarisk, mashtaka plant, sweet reed, and cedar oil into it, expose it to the stars overnight, draw a magic circle around it, and in the morning, facing the sun, you massage him. A holy water vessel with stones and herbs is exposed to stars in apotropaic rituals too. The practice of nocturnal exposition is best known from the Greeks, who expressed the exposition to stellar irradiation by a simple verb, astronomein. That is tempting to translate into English if there were such a verb as to bestar. We need not, however, go all the way to the Greeks for interpreting the phrase, "let it spend the night under the stars," as an instruction to secure the benefic influence of the stars. It is in a Hittite text that we find the earliest explicit reference to this belief and this practice. So far, only a single Old Babylonian text attests to the importance attached to stellar irradiation by prescribing that the concoction should spend the night under the stars. By contrast, the Hittite text, from about the 13th century and thus antedating most of the relevant Babylonian texts by about 600 years, is much more explicit. It directs the exorcist to take the substance to be used onto the roof and to recite as follows: "From on high in the sky may the 1,000 stars incant it, and may the moon god incant it, and it remains under the stars all night." The Hittite verb used for the celestial irradiation is hukishk, which is translated into German by the editor of the text, Kronasser, as besprechen. For lack of a similarly appropriate term in English, I had to invent one, precisely the verb I just used, to incant, that is, a verb from which the word incantation derives, or could derive. The Hittite text, as you see, emphasizes the power the stars exercise and the way in which this power is manifested, while the Akkadian texts highlight the act of the exposition. The result expected in both cultures, however, is not in doubt. The stars will make the potion or salve potent and efficacious. Should we need proof for our argument that the phrase, "let it stand overnight under the stars," in fact refers to stellar irradiation and is not simply a poetic way of giving culinary directions, we can turn to those texts which name the star or constellation to which the preparation should be exposed. For example, at night you place it in front of the goat star, and in the morning before sunrise, before he sets foot on the ground, he drinks it. Or again, these 24 herbs and aromatics you arrange before the goat star. You moisten them with beer, in the morning you boil it. The star called goat star in Sumerian alike corresponds to the constellation Lyra, or perhaps only to its brightest star, Vega, and is the star of the goddess Gula. And Gula, for the Babylonians, is the goddess of healing. She is also, as the dog her companion indicates, a chthonic goddess, and resembles the Greek underworld goddess Hecate, even in her association with the goat star, since the goat is also the animal of Hecate. Since most of the specific instructions mention the constellation of Gula the goat, or rather she-goat, we understand how irradiation by the star of the goddess of healing would be especially effective. The star of Gula, especially the 0.1 magnitude Vega, the fourth brightest of all the stars, is particularly prominent in the summer sky, but can be seen at varying times any night of the year. Even more explicit is the instruction, at night you let it stand overnight before the goat star, and you invoke the names of Gula and of Belek Eli. A further proof for the identity of the goat star and the goddess of healing is the recipe. You take equal amounts of various herbs, chop them, sprinkle them with pure juniper juice, and place the mixture before Gula, while the duplicate to this text says place it before the goat star. Even the veterinarian exposed the medicine he prepared as a potion for horses to the goat star. Take 1/3 liter each from the 23 plants enumerated above, leave them overnight exposed to the goat star, in the morning boil them. This is a tonic for horses. Just in what way the stars were supposed to make the herb efficacious is unclear. Perhaps simply by looking down, by seeing what is exposed to them, as the occasionally used verb amaru, to see, to look, may indicate. For example, during the day the sun should see it, at night the stars should see it. Or it is possible that the stars were supposed to bedew the substance to make it efficacious. The concept of the dew of the stars is known not only from classical antiquity, but also from Babylonia, as the poetic simile kimanarshi shakakabi, like dew from the stars, attests. Most efficacious are plants growing in the mountains. There on the mountain's heights, they are better exposed to the influence of the stars. Some of you may remember the poem I discussed in my lecture of a few years ago. It began, "The heart's ease herb grows on the mountain. I pulled it up and it seized my heart." Such mountain-grown herbs are depicted on the proto-Elamite seal from Susa. There they are, growing out of the mountain. And in the fields and gardens of Khuzestan, you may still see their late descendants. And I think I have another slide. Besides Vega, the constellation most frequently appealed to for irradiating the substance exposed to it is Ursa Major, or Big Dipper, that the Greeks called the bear Arctos, but that the Babylonians, just as the Hungarians and various Central Asian peoples, called the wagon. Appeals to Arctos the bear are also frequent in the Greek magical papyri. Since Ursa Major is a circumpolar constellation and thus never sets, or as the Babylonians put it, it stands there all year, it could be invoked at any season, so that here too practical considerations could have played a role. Still, we should note that just as in Greek the bear Arctos is a word of feminine gender, so is the Akkadian word for wagon Eriku. The wagon constellation is identified with the goddess Ishtar and with her heavenly manifestation, the planet Venus. In her manifestation as the year-round visible circumpolar constellation, Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, Ishtar can exert her influence even when her planet Venus is invisible. If I am correct, then the planet Venus as the goddess Ishtar, also called Lady of the Stars, is the first of the planets to be associated with influencing medical treatment, and is thus an early example of the science that the Greeks called iatromathematics, that is, the application of astrology to the art of healing. But that is a topic for another evening. While in Greek astrological texts 7 plants are assigned to the 7 planets, and 12 herbs to the 12 zodiacal signs, it is only in Seleucid Babylonia that explicit connections were systematically made between the zodiacal signs and plants, stones, and trees. And this is, of course, a great manuscript which shows the 7 plants associated with the 7 planets. And I tried to match it as best I could with Karen's beautiful wildflower pictures from Khuzestan. This is the plate with all 7 planets. This is the herb of Mercury and the herb of the Moon. And these are the herbs of Mars, the Sun, and Venus. And the pretty horrible one is the plant of Saturn and the plant of Jupiter on the right. You recall that in the Hittite ritual, not only the stars were asked to incant the substance exposed to them, but so was the moon. Therefore, it may surprise us that nocturnal exposition in Babylonia speaks of the stars only, and not of the moon. Possibly, the moon is not invoked because, as we have seen earlier, the light of the moon, as well as that of the sun, was to be avoided when the herb was picked or the root was dug. Yet I can think of another reason for this omission. The moon can indeed have an influence on the drugs, but that influence is harmful, noxious influence, not a benefic one. And those who invoke and use this influence, I might say affluence, are not the physicians or herbalists, but the sorceresses. Whether it is Medea or the woman scorned in Theocritus' idyll I quoted earlier, or the Thessalian sorceress in Lucan, who prepare a poisonous philtre or a potion to practice black magic, in their machinations they not only invoke, but even draw down the moon to earth. In Babylonia, too, this strange feat, drawing down the moon from the sky, was associated with nefarious practices, as a tantalizingly brief reference to barbarian women who bring the moon down from heaven attests. Is it their association with the goddesses Gula and Ishtar, or with the 7 planets, that makes these herbs hallowed? The hallowed herbs, and I must pronounce the H's, which is supposed to be alliterating, of my title are, as you must have surmised, a quote. The quote comes from the description of Thessaly, the just mentioned land of sorceresses, in the 6th book of Lucan's epic, The Civil War. And let me close with a few lines from this poem in the translation of Nicholas Rao in the early 18th century. In these lines, the sorceress conjures the moon, or fair Cynthia, to impart her fatal form There potent and mysterious plants arise, plants that compel the gods and awe the skies. There leaves unfolded to Medea's view, such as her native Colchis never knew. Magic the starry lamps from heaven can tear, and shoot them gleaming through the dusky air, can blot fair Cynthia's countenance serene, and poison with foul spells the silver queen. Held by the charming song, she strives in vain, and labors with the long pursuing pain, till down and downward still, compelled to come, on hallowed herbs she sheds her fatal foam. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not going to go out and look in the backyard tonight because I think there's a moon. I have a feeling that several of you have questions for Erika Reiner, and so please come to the reception and ask her. Before we adjourn, let me mention that our next lecture will be in February, on the 15th of February, when Harvey Weiss from Yale University is going to speak on North versus South at Tel Leilon in Syria. But for now, thank you very much. And I hope you'll all come with your questions, and we'll see you at the reception. Thank you.